services company that is based here in Milwaukee but does business on a global scale. 4,500 offices in 80 countries and territories, revenue of about $21 billion now. Is that what we're up to?
Yep.
$21 billion. And I should also point out that Jeff Joerres is a Marquette University graduate. And, and he is also on the Marquette University Board of Trustees, which is an important thing. So we'd like to say welcome.
I voted yes for the law school.
Let's give him a round of applause and welcome him to Marquette Law School. What do they say? We live in interesting times, and I thought that's where we begin today, by talking about the events of the last month or so. And I'd like to get your take as someone who does business on a global scale. What do you think about what's happening?
Well, you know, I knew this would come up, so I've tried to frame it in a way that said, you know, how can we take something as so complex, so unknown, and we have treasury functions all over the world, and money management, and sweeping accounts, and banking relationships, investment banking relationships. And I called on those people, whether it be my friends at Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, or what we're doing at Mizuho in Japan. And I'm talking to the leaders of these organizations. And they're giving me a fair amount of answers that I don't completely understand, and to be honest with you, because there's so much complexity in this. But what is a theme that is clear here, and it's going to get more and more clear, is that there was this time when, it wasn't that long ago, it's amazing how perspectives change, but it was about 6 months or a year ago, you were hearing these things about decoupling. What I mean by decoupling was we were having a housing crisis in the U.S. And that was a housing thing in the U.S., and it wasn't going to affect the rest of the world. And Europe had their own thing, and Europe wouldn't possibly touch those things. They didn't do that. The automotive leases and loans that were given out were really a U.S. phenomenon, therefore it wasn't going to touch any of the Japanese side of it. And now we step back and say, you know what? Decoupling, if we really thought about it, that's ridiculous. Because of the global nature of what's happened, of how things are now so intertwined, that there is a ripple effect. And it's not just, as many would like to say, particularly during this kind of tumultuous time of not only what we're having in the economy, but what we're having from an election period, which I think actually creates more confusion in the whole thing, is that so many of the Europeans, and I spend about 50% of my time in Europe, I was just in Amsterdam last week, they really want to point and say, it's your fault. It's the U.S. It's that U.S. greed system, it's that U.S. thing that did this, it's that. And I think so what we've got is a lot of energy, and what is going on right now is that, think of a line of dominoes that are tipping, and in my view is we're about halfway through that.
How could we have misread this? You talk about 6 months ago or a year ago. Is it greed, is it corruption, or is it just bad decisions?
Well, I really have a hard time going down the path of greed and corruption. There is greed, and I prefer the word piggy myself, because there are CEOs who are picky, if you will. That if I made 20 million, but the guy that I hang around with at the lunch club made 40, I'm really not doing that well. That's choose your friends more wisely. Something you learn at Marquette if you go here. Choose your friends more wisely, but also don't get carried away with it. So what was happening in the financial industry, particularly if you look at something like AIG, which AIG is an insurance company that is one of the best insurance companies, carries us throughout the entire world. AIG is our carrier throughout the entire world. It wasn't the insurance that was bad. It was the notion that risk was becoming less because I could make more profits, when in fact the risk premium was going up. And I think when you look at risk spreads in loans or LIBOR or any of those things that really involve risk, we had too much money in the markets. When you have too much money in the markets, you disregard risk. Risk was disregarded, and as a result, terrible decisions were made.
Are there systems in place in a corporation to prevent that? If so, what happened here? Did people just sort of look past the obvious warning signs? Because it just seems so good, you just couldn't resist?
Well, it's so hard when you look back, because when you dissect it, you could probably look back to a certain risk committee meeting, which all of those companies would have some form of risk committee, either a sub of the audit committee or the audit committee themselves. And there'll be a point to where there was maybe this tipping point that they went to the risk that they shouldn't have gone. But I think more importantly is that it's this kind of student body right thing that happens. And you're each taking 3 little shovel steps at a time, and the whole body's moving with you, so it still feels like I'm okay. And I'm moving over, and I'm moving over, and I'm moving over, and all before you know it, you're on the completely other side of the campus. And that was happening in these, and these are smart people with some extremely, extremely smart people managing them. The smartest people managing smarter people can lead to a dangerous situation because they're all nodding about how they agree with the algorithmic formula based on the infinity of pi or something like that, and now they've really lost their risk premium. And I think what's happening now, and what will happen, which I'm not in favor of, but I think it should happen, is you're going to have to regulate risk more, because it was clearly not self-regulated.
Besides regulating risk more, what is the impact of this financial crisis? Are we talking about a global recession? Give me your view of that.
I think the impact is twofold. One is we sit here, and I assume that most of the people in this room are from the United States. And I think we sit here in a very tenuous position that we knew was coming, which is the United States will have a very different influence on the rest of the world. There will be a cynicism, which was beginning anyway, but there will be more of a cynicism in working with a U.S. financial institution on any kind of instrument, even in an instrument that might actually be a healthy instrument. That cynicism will relate back to the dangers of doing business with the U.S. And I think that puts more pressure on the U.S., which was already under pressure from what was happening in Asia. So I think the U.S. has a competitive issue that was going to happen that has now been accelerated. The second issue is that this is going to cause a global recession. Some will hit it more than others. If you look at GDP growth in China, which has been running at 11, 12, 10, 11, 12, 12, quarter by quarter, they're going to go down to 7, they're going to go down to 6, and that may still sound good because we're sitting at 2 or 1.5 or something like that. 6 for them is as bad as 1 or 2 for us. So now they're in a recession. India is going to go there. So as I commented before, there is a synchronicity that's happening in the global economy, which there is no decoupling. Now, the advantage to that is when you get to the other side, there is a bit of euphoria all over the place. But my view is that's going to take a little while.
That's what Ben Bernanke was just saying a couple of moments ago.
I'm glad that Ben agrees with me.
Yeah. No, he was saying